Thrown out as a teenager due to false stories my sister spread, my parents reappeared years later, noticing my success and demanding money, despite abandoning me when I was younger. Growing up with a twin should have meant having a lifelong partner to share victories and struggles, but for me it was like living in the shadow of someone who always stole the spotlight. From the beginning, it was obvious who the golden child was and who wasn't. My sister, Maddie, embodied everything my parents hoped for in a child dedicated to her studies, focused on the future, and a mirror of their aspirations. I, however, was the other twin, the one who enjoyed climbing trees more than reading, the one who would rather play soccer than sit through piano lessons. For as long as I can remember, my parents were open about their differing expectations. They praised Maddie for every A she earned and scolded me for every B that showed up on my report card. Their talks about her future were filled with hopeful planned scholarships, prestigious universities, a well-paid career. When it came to my future, though, discussions were filled with concerns, as if my love for sports over studies was a flaw that needed fixing. This favoritism extended far beyond academics or future plans. It impacted every part of our lives, even celebrations of personal milestones like birthdays. Every year, Maddie's birthday was a grand occasion, with our parents hosting big parties, inviting all her school friends and filling our backyard with balloons, games, and laughter. There would be magic shows, her favorite foods, and a towering cake that nearly reached the ceiling. In stark contrast, my birthdays felt like an afterthought. If Maddie's birthday was a full orchestra, mine was a small family dinner with a cake that looked like it had been bought hastily. I remember feeling a mix of resignation and envy, watching Maddie blow out her candles with a radiant smile, surrounded by friends and gifts, knowing my own celebration would never compare. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother. She had a unique way of making me feel valued, something my parents couldn't offer. Whenever she visited, her warmth filled the entire house. She'd always sneak me a box of my favorite chocolates, hidden in her suitcase until she could give them to me in private, away from my parents' indifferent gazes. "Keep your spirits up, darling," she'd say, slipping a few dollars into my hand, urging me to treat myself. As I got older, the favoritism became even more obvious, turning into what felt like emotional neglect. My parents attended every one of Maddie's soccer games, cheering loudly from the sidelines, but they rarely showed up for my track meets. And on the few occasions they did, they spent most of the time on their phones or talking about Maddie's latest achievements with other parents. This emotional toll was heavy. I began to internalize their disapproval, feeling as though I was somehow less deserving of attention and love than Maddie. At night, I'd lie in bed, listening to the distant laughter from Maddie's room, where she and her friends played video games or watched movies, while my room felt like a quiet bubble, cut off from everything. High school can either be a battleground or a playground, depending on who you are and your family's dynamics. For me, it was more of a battleground, a place where I had to navigate not just academic pressures but also the complicated terrain of my family relationships, especially with my twin, Maddie. As we moved into more challenging academic years, the favoritism from my parents followed me everywhere. Maddie was put on a pedestal, her achievements celebrated and magnified, while my accomplishments, if acknowledged at all, were met with a nod or a fleeting smile. It wasn't just the lack of attention from my parents that hurt, it was their direct disapproval of my interests. I had always found peace in sports and physical activities, but my parents saw it as a distraction. They thought my time on the track or field was time wasted, better spent buried in textbooks. One afternoon, a key incident turned their disapproval into a strict ban. I had just returned home, thrilled to share that I'd made the varsity soccer team. Excited, I bounded into the kitchen, hoping this achievement might finally earn me some of the praise Maddie usually received. Instead, their response was cold and dismissive. "We'd rather you focus on your studies like your sister," my dad said, barely glancing up from his newspaper. "Sports won't get you into a good college." The constant comparisons and frustration of always being found lacking was infuriating. I tried to explain that sports weren't just a pastime, but something that genuinely made me happy. Their response was firm: "No extracurricular activities until your grades meet our standards." My mom declared, ending the conversation. I withdrew to my room, simmering with anger, feeling suffocated by the lack of control over my own choices. It felt as though my dreams and passions were secondary to a version of who I was supposed to be, an image my parents had carefully constructed without my input. This relentless pressure from my parents only escalated after an incident they viewed as the final straw. It happened innocently enough. I had downloaded Snapchat to stay connected with friends. For teenagers my age, using social media was pretty typical, But when my parents found the app on my phone during one of their routine checks, they reacted as if I had committed a major offense. Their anger was extreme, they yelled, accusing me of being secretive and unreliable. "You're just like your friends, wasting your life with these distractions," my mom shouted, throwing my phone across the room. The screen shattered against the wall, symbolizing the growing emotional divide between us. As punishment, they removed my bedroom door. "No privacy for someone who can't be trusted," my dad said coldly, taking out the final screw. I was left feeling exposed. My personal space invaded, a sharp reminder of how little control I had over my own life under their roof. The real betrayal, though, came from Maddie, who seized this opportunity to get even closer to our parents. Rather than supporting me, she sided with them, adding her own accusations. "She's always hiding things from you," Maddie would say, painting me as untrustworthy whenever she could. Her words were like fuel on the fire, reinforcing my parents' worst beliefs about me. Maddie's betrayal didn't stop at home. She took her harmful stories to school, spreading rumors that I was reckless, that I partied excessively, that I was bound to fail out of school. Her words were unfounded, but they carried weight. Soon I noticed a change in how my classmates treated me. Whispers trailed me in the hallways, and friends who used to greet me warmly now only offered cool nods or avoided eye contact, as if Maddie's distorted, malicious version of me had taken over. Things reached a breaking point during a heated argument at home about my supposed lack of ambition. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" my parents often said, and this time the words stung more than ever. I shouted back, something I rarely did. "Because I'm not Maddie, and I don't want to be her." The room fell silent, and for a brief moment I saw shock in their expressions, but it quickly turned to anger, and any hope of being heard vanished. That night, as I lay in bed, I understood that the gap between us was too wide to bridge. My own family saw me as an outsider, a flaw in their perfect world. The emotional toll was heavy, and I found myself retreating, building walls around my heart to shield it from more pain. School became something I endured rather than enjoyed, and home offered no refuge. The conflict at home intensified during my sophomore year of high school. The pressure from my parents to excel academically and follow in Maddie's footsteps was suffocating. Combined with Maddie's ongoing attempts to ruin my reputation both at home and at school, I felt constantly cornered, always on edge, as if balancing on a tightrope without a safety net. Around this time, a small incident became the catalyst for an even bigger rift within our family. It was minor, something that shouldn't have mattered, but in our high-stress household it was like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. I had been doing well in a few subjects that term, achieving grades comparable to Maddie's. I remember feeling a glimmer of pride, a rare sensation given the usual cloud of criticism over me. Hoping to share some good news, I approached my parents one evening with my report card in hand, hoping they might see me as more than just the other twin. Their reaction was lukewarm. They acknowledged my good grades with a nod, but the conversation quickly shifted back to Maddie and her recent acceptance into a prestigious summer program, a topic that dominated dinner discussions for weeks. My accomplishment was brushed aside, and the potential moment of connection slipped away. This repeated neglect had a profound impact on me, deepening the isolation I felt at home. My relationship with my parents became more transactional, limited to essentials rather than any genuine exchange of thoughts or feelings. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around, always wary of reprimands or dismissal. As the school year went on, Maddie's behavior escalated from subtle jabs to outright confrontations. She seemed to find some twisted satisfaction in making me uncomfortable, often provoking arguments in front of our parents, knowing they would take her side. One argument erupted over something as trivial as the TV remote. Maddie wanted to watch a documentary for a school project, and I was in the middle of a movie I'd been looking forward to all week. When I refused to give up the remote, Maddie turned to our parents, playing the victim, claiming I was always hostile and never supportive of her academic efforts. The argument quickly escalated, voices were raised, and in the heat of the moment, Maddie accused me of sabotaging her chances of success by being petty and selfish. The accusation was ridiculous, but my parents believed her, scolding me for being inconsiderate and demanding I apologize. Humiliated and frustrated, I stormed out of the room, the injustice of the situation burning in my chest. It was obvious that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be wrong in their eyes. This continual favoritism emboldened Maddie, and she began crafting even more elaborate stories about me at school, telling friends and others that I was a troublemaker at home, ungrateful and rebellious. The stories my sister told painted me as the villain in our family drama, a narrative that began to creep into my social life, affecting my friendships and connections at school. The real breaking point came during an incident that not only fractured my relationship with my family but also marked the beginning of my journey toward independence. It happened on a day that started like any other. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when Maddie entered, her attitude confrontational, her eyes accusatory. Without any cause, she picked a fight, scolding me for using the last of the bread, fully aware that our parents were listening. As the argument escalated, Maddie did something I never expected. In a sudden burst of anger, she shoved me. The force caught me off guard and I stumbled backward into the counter. The pain was sharp, and her unexpected aggression left me stunned. This physical altercation was a new low in our relationship. When our parents rushed into the kitchen, Maddie quickly played the victim, claiming I had provoked her and that she was merely defending herself. I tried to explain, to tell them she had pushed me first, but my words were ignored. Their disappointment was written on their faces, and the unfairness of it all was overwhelming. Not only had my own sister hurt me physically, but I was also being blamed for it. It became painfully clear that my place in the family depended on my silence and compliance, and even then, fair treatment wasn't guaranteed. That night, lying in my room with the door still off its hinges, the reality of my situation sank in. I was alone in a family that didn't see me, in a home where I couldn't speak up or even defend myself. My sister's jealousy reached a peak on our 14th birthday. None of her friends came to her party, though I didn't know why they'd chosen to treat her that way. In contrast, my friends took me out for ice cream and I had a wonderful day. This only fueled her anger and she sought revenge. Maddie started spreading false rumors about me at school, making me out to be a spoiled brat. She even falsely accused me of physically hurting her, claiming that since our parents favored her, I was taking out my frustration on her. She went as far as inflicting injuries on herself, giving herself bruises and even a black eye, which she used to back up her lies. At school, she would show off these self-inflicted injuries, telling stories to make it look like I had attacked her. When our parents questioned her, she would lie, saying she got hurt during activities like playing football with friends. The lies, along with her bruises, began to gain traction, and soon whispers about me circulated through the school. Even my friends started to treat me differently. I noticed subtle changes. Friends who once greeted me warmly in the hallways now seemed distant, and I was invited to group activities less frequently. It was as if a switch had flipped, and people hesitated to be seen with a girl accused of violence. One day I gathered the courage to ask my former best friend why things had changed between us. She told me about the lies Maddie had been spreading, sharing the details of how Maddie had painted me as a spoiled, violent person. Hearing this was a painful mix of disbelief and betrayal. Like the ground had shifted beneath me, my own twin sister, someone I'd grown up with, was accusing me of things I would never dream of doing. The day after hearing this, I confronted Maddie after school, begging her to stop lying about me. But she only smirked and told me I deserved to be alone. Her words left me speechless, as her lies and actions began to genuinely frighten me. I wanted to approach my parents about it, but I feared they'd side with her. The isolation cut deep, especially since I'd always been open to making friends. It felt like her jealousy-driven lies were tearing apart the friendships I'd worked hard to build. Even teachers started to hear the rumors. It was surreal, as if I was living in a different reality where my true self was buried beneath the malicious story my sister had crafted. The rumor spread quickly, soon reaching the principal's attention, and my worst fear came to life. He called Maddie, me, and our parents to his office to discuss the accusations. Sitting there, my heart pounded as the principal demanded the truth. I hoped Maddie would finally admit the lies, but instead she doubled down, insisting the rumors were accurate and casting me as a bully who routinely hurt her whenever our parents were out of sight. I was stunned, sitting there in shock as Maddie continued spinning her twisted story, claiming that I resented her for being favored by our parents. Her words were nothing but lies, but she maintained her story as if it were the truth. My mom began to cry as she listened, clinging to Maddie like she was a hero for speaking up. My dad tried to console her, telling her how brave she was for finally revealing the truth and promising her protection. After that day, I tried to defend myself, pleading with the principal, insisting that every accusation was false. But it felt like I was drowning in an ocean of accusations, desperately trying to reach the surface as my sister's lies kept pulling me under. My mom kept crying, hugging Maddie tightly, giving me accusing looks as if I were an intruder in my own family. It felt like I was battling against an unbreakable wall built from my sister's fabrications. The principal, clearly convinced by Maddie's story, reprimanded me harshly, declaring that the school had a zero-tolerance policy for bullying and warning me of the consequences. I begged him not to suspend me, pleading with tears streaming down my face, trying to explain that I'd done nothing wrong. But he shook his head, saying he couldn't overlook something so serious. I was crushed as he told me I'd be suspended for 10 days to serve as an example against bullying. His decision hit me like a punch, and I broke down, nearly begging him to reconsider. My parents, furious and humiliated by the whole ordeal, dragged me out of the principal's office. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to defend myself and make them understand, but they wouldn't hear any of it. We left the school, and my heart felt heavy with frustration and shame. When we got home, things took an unexpected turn. My dad began packing up my things without warning. I stood there in shock, utterly confused, unable to comprehend what was happening. My mom asked him what he was doing, but he only yelled that he couldn't let me stay in the same house as my sister anymore. Crying, I dropped to my knees and begged my sister to tell them the truth, but she remained cold, unmoved by my tears. My dad kept packing, eventually tossing my suitcase into the foyer. I clung to his legs, desperately pleading with him not to throw me out, but he coldly told me that a bully like me didn't deserve to live in his house and that he'd ask my grandmother to take me if she was willing. It felt as if my world had crumbled beneath me. I stood there, stunned, surrounded by my belongings scattered across the foyer, being cast out of my own home. Eventually, my grandmother arrived, gathering my things and helping me load them into her car. She ensured I was buckled in before heading toward my parents' front door. She rang the bell, and when my dad answered, she firmly scolded him for treating me so harshly. With fierce determination, she warned him that if he ever tried to contact or approach me again, she wouldn't hesitate to involve the police or child services, emphasizing that his actions could land him in jail. My mom attempted to shift the blame, claiming it was all my fault, but my grandmother wouldn't tolerate it. She held her ground, defending me and insisting that I was just a child who didn't deserve such heartless treatment. For the first time, I truly saw the strength in my grandmother, as she stood up to my parents and believed in me when no one else did. Finally, we left, leaving behind the only home I had ever known. The pain I felt was indescribable, a deep wound that words couldn't capture. I spent days crying in bed, unable to eat despite my grandmother's encouragement. When I told her about what my sister had done, she was shocked, but she assured me she believed me, and having her support was my one comfort. After my 10-day suspension ended, the thought of returning to school felt like walking back into a hostile environment. As I walked through the familiar halls, the judging looks, whispers, and sideways glances were impossible to ignore. The weight of the false accusations lingered, while my sister acted as though I didn't exist, befriending those who believed her and saw her as a victim of my supposed actions. No matter how hard I tried to share my side of the story, no one listened. I became an outcast, burdened by an unfair label that followed me everywhere: classrooms, the cafeteria, hallways. Faces filled with distrust and disdain surrounded me, making me feel alone. I kept my head down, attended all my classes, ate lunch alone, and headed straight home afterward. Friends were non-existent, and it felt as though no one wanted me around. Through it all, my parents never once called to check on me. My grandmother, however, continually reassured me that none of this was my fault and that one day things would get better. I managed to graduate with good grades, eager to start fresh in college and hoping for a better life. Going away to college was my first taste of freedom, a time when I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. There was no one watching my every move, no comparisons, no competition. I met people with similar interests, forming genuine friendships. Despite the emotional and physical scars left by my family and peers, I focused on moving forward and fully embracing the college experience. During this time, I discovered my knack for content writing. Although I'd always wanted to be a writer, I hadn't been sure it was a practical path, so I had set the dream aside. But to make some money, I started freelancing, signing up on various platforms and landing jobs with reputable clients. Slowly, I built a portfolio, maintaining this side hustle throughout college without ever needing financial help from my parents. After graduating, instead of taking a corporate job, I realized I could pursue content writing full-time. My steady client base and long-term professional relationships helped me secure multiple projects, making it possible to support myself entirely. Building a legitimate freelancing career made me financially independent and allowed me to travel as a digital nomad. Traveling became a way to heal from my past, though it was far from easy. I saved as much as possible and took a chance on myself, seeing the world and discovering there was still so much left to explore. Throughout all of this, the one person I considered family was my grandmother, whom I adored. She was saddened when I moved out, but she understood my need for independence. Despite my busy schedule, I made it a priority to be there for her whenever possible. I visited her on weekends, and we often shared meals or spent time on the porch, immersed in conversations ranging from childhood memories to recent happenings. On weekends, I would often spend whole afternoons assisting her with household tasks or joining her for relaxed walks in the nearby park. Recently, I wrapped up one of the most significant projects of my career. While I can't disclose the brand name, I had the fortune of writing blog posts and product descriptions for them. Once the project was completed, I asked the team I'd worked with to leave positive feedback on my website, and they willingly agreed. I then took screenshots of some of their comments to share on my Instagram, knowing that collaborating with such a major brand was an enormous achievement. As anticipated, many other content writers reached out to congratulate me on my career milestone, with some even reposting my story to spread the news further. This is how I started receiving messages from strangers who were also interested in getting assistance with their websites. My relatives noticed this development as well, and a few of them reached out with congratulatory messages. Eventually, my college principal contacted me, having seen my recent successes, and invited me to conduct a seminar at the college to inspire students pursuing careers in content writing. Although public speaking makes me quite anxious, I decided to seize the opportunity and accepted. Standing before a room filled with eager faces, sharing my experiences and insights, felt like my life had come full circle. During my talk, I shared the challenges I had faced and how I persevered through difficult times. It was genuinely rewarding to inspire others and contribute to the growth of the writing community. Some clips of my speech started going viral in Facebook groups, resonating with many people. It was gratifying to finally gain recognition for my hard work. Last week, I was invited to speak on a local news show about the advantages of content writing, where I was asked to discuss my journey and offer insights to their viewers. Although I was somewhat nervous, I was also excited about the chance to reach a wider audience. On the show, I spoke about my experiences, the significance of client feedback, and how a simple acknowledgement could lead to incredible opportunities. Reaching a larger audience and inspiring more individuals in the field was both humbling and exhilarating. When the show aired, I proudly shared a few clips on my Instagram, thrilled to have appeared on television. As word spread about my success, my extended family, including my cousins, became aware of my achievements. Since my parents rarely talked about me, many family members were unaware that I was collaborating with well-known brands and receiving invitations for TV interviews. It seems the news finally reached my parents as well. A few days later, while I was engrossed in a new project with my phone on silent, I finished my work to find 6 missed calls from my mom. I was genuinely surprised to see her name, as it had been a very long time since she last contacted me. After all those years of silence, I was uncertain why she was calling, but I reluctantly called her back, and she answered right away. I asked if everything was okay, and my mom began congratulating me, with my dad likely by her side, jumping into the conversation to ask about my life and well-being. I responded to their questions without much thought, but it didn't feel strange until they began inquiring about my income. I replied that my finances were private, but my dad insisted that as family I shouldn't feel uncomfortable sharing such information. I informed them that I was financially stable, at which point my mom started talking about the hardships they were facing. The conversation went like this. My mom said they were now retired and had been wanting to renovate the house for some time, as it was in poor condition, but they had no savings left. She mentioned that my recent success, especially the TV interview, gave them hope that I might help fund the renovations. My dad chimed in, emphasizing that as family I shouldn't hesitate to share my earnings. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked why they were now asking me for money after years of no contact. Although I acknowledged their congratulations, I firmly told them I wouldn't be providing financial support. At this, my mom accused me of being selfish and said I should help family, with my dad adding that as my parents they deserved my support, and it was the least I could do. Frustrated, I decided to handle the situation differently. Instead of arguing, I chose to set a condition. My dad curiously asked what it was, and without hesitating I told them that if they wanted my help, they would need to publicly admit in front of family and friends that my sister had spread the harmful rumors that damaged my reputation. I wanted them to hold my sister accountable, just as they had judged me, by acknowledging the pain they had caused. My dad questioned the need for such a demand, and my mom suggested we resolve the matter privately, but I insisted that this condition was non-negotiable if they wanted any assistance from me in the future. As tensions rose, my dad's voice grew louder as he asserted his role as my father, insisting it was my duty to help family in need. My mom, in a final attempt, urged me to do what was right, reminding me of the years they spent raising me. I found the irony bitter, as it had been my grandmother who raised me after my parents had cast me aside. I firmly reminded them of the past, reiterating that if they wanted my support now, they would have to admit the truth publicly, holding my sister accountable for her actions. Since this conversation, my parents have been calling me repeatedly, but I've chosen to ignore their calls. I'm starting to wonder if I made a mistake by calling them back that day. I'm curious if things would really be worse for me if I chose not to help my parents at all. Update 1. It's been a chaotic week since I last shared my story, and the overwhelming support and encouragement I've received from everyone has been deeply touching. It's reassuring to know I'm not alone in this. I'm relieved that everyone agrees I shouldn't engage with my parents or consider offering them help after everything they've put me through. The reason I imposed such a condition on them was because I knew they would never agree to it. I'm well aware that they care about my sister too much, and even if they've now realized her lies, they would never make her face the same treatment they gave me. Today, my sister sent a rude message after my parents tried to contact me again and I declined their calls. Here's what she wrote. It's been a while since I last saw you, and I can say every day without you in my life has been great. I heard Mom and Dad tried to reach out to you, and you gave them some absurd ultimatum. You know they'll never agree to it, right? They never really loved you. And they would never do anything that would hurt me. I admit that I lied about you all those years ago, but that was 15 years ago, so stop being selfish and let go of the past. You're not married or a parent. So why can't you help them by covering the costs of their home repairs, do the right thing, and be a better daughter? Reading her words was like a punch to the gut. The nerve she had to belittle everything I've gone through and dismiss my conditions showed her utter lack of empathy. Her attempt to guilt-trip me by pointing out my unmarried and childless status was both offensive and underscored just how little regard she had for me. Driven by frustration and a sense of justice, I realized it was time to take action and finally reveal the truth that had been hidden too long. I sat down to write an email to my parents and close relatives, recounting the painful details of my upbringing and the unfair treatment I'd endured at home. In the email, I described the strict, oppressive environment my parents imposed on me, compared to the freedom my twin sister enjoyed. I also detailed the false rumor my sister spread about me at school, which had serious consequences and tarnished my reputation. I wrote about how my parents had thrown me out, and that without my grandmother's support, I might not have survived on my own. Toward the end, I asked everyone to read a message my sister had sent, attaching a screenshot where she confessed to lying about me. I hoped this would finally expose the lies that had hurt me for so long. I sent the email just an hour ago, knowing it would likely cause an uproar once my parents and sister read it. I'll share another update on how my family responds. Update 2. A month has passed since my last update, and as expected, a lot has happened. My family did, indeed, explode after reading the email. My parents received backlash from relatives who hadn't known the full extent of their favoritism and emotional abuse. Many family members reached out to express their shock and apologize for not supporting me sooner. My sister and parents flooded my phone with increasingly hostile and even threatening messages, so I contacted a lawyer who sent them a cease and desist notice. This warned them to stop reaching out to me, or they'd face serious legal consequences. Apparently, this put an end to their attempts to contact me. My grandmother believes I did the right thing by sharing the truth and fully supports me, which means the world to me. Update 3. 2 months have gone by since my last update, and I'm pleased to report that things in my life are going well. Professionally, my content writing business is thriving, and I'm receiving more invitations to speak at seminars and on podcasts, solidifying my reputation in the field. I remain close to my grandmother, and recently took a 1-week break from work to spend quality time with her. She's been gardening lately, and taught me a lot about various flowers and herbs in her garden. The moments we share, whether enjoying meals together, having heartfelt talks, or simply each other's presence, are memories I deeply cherish. Since the lawyer's letter, my family has stopped trying to contact me, and I'm relieved to have that distance. I've also started therapy, hoping it will help me heal. For now, I think this will be my final update.